Security guards. They're the people who patrol the empty hallways, sit in booths staring at monitors, and keep watch when everyone else has gone home. They're the last line of defense between safety and chaos. But what happens when the thing they're guarding against isn't just a thief, or a vandal, or a trespasser, but something darker? Something unseen, something that waits in the shadows, watching them instead. Tonight, you'll hear 3 scary true security guard horror stories, true scary horror stories, creepy stories, home alone horror stories for sleep, scary stories animated, haunted tales, dark secrets, nightmare tales, urban legends, and eerie encounters that prove the job of a guard isn't just about keeping watch. Sometimes, the danger is already inside. Sometimes, it's not human at all. If you love true horror stories, paranormal encounters, haunted tales, creepy stories, dark folklore, and urban fright, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because these aren't just scary stories, they're terrifying tales that really happened. This story is about the hospital basement. Derek was a night shift security guard at a large hospital in the Midwest. His job seemed simple: patrol the hallways, monitor doors, make sure nobody wandered where they weren't supposed to. Most nights were uneventful. But the basement was different. The basement housed old storage rooms, unused operating theaters, and a morgue that hadn't been active in years. Staff joked it was haunted, and Derek laughed along, but the first time he had to patrol there alone, he understood why. The air was heavy, colder than the rest of the building. His flashlight barely seemed to cut through the darkness. One night around 3 a.m., his radio crackled with static. Then, through the noise, came a whisper, "Derek." He froze. No one on staff called him by name over the radio. He answered back, but there was no reply, just more static. When he returned to the security office, his partner swore no one had called him. The radios had been silent. That was only the beginning. On another patrol, Derek heard the squeak of gurney wheels echoing through the empty halls. He followed the sound, only to find a hallway completely empty. But on the floor, faint drag marks, like wheels had been pushed through the dust. The scariest night came when he had to check the old morgue. The lights flickered overhead as he entered. On the stainless steel table lay a white sheet, draped over a body. His log said no patients had been moved down there in years. Nervous, he reached to pull the sheet away, only to find nothing underneath. Just the table. Then, behind him, the door slammed shut. He turned and saw the reflection in the observation window. Not his own. A tall figure stood behind him in the room. But when he spun around, nothing. He left the basement running, refusing to finish his patrol. Weeks later, Derek transferred to a different job. But he admitted to friends that he still dreamed about the basement, dreams of being called by name, of dragging wheels, of the faceless figure watching him from behind the morgue glass. Because in the world of true scary horror stories and haunted tales, sometimes the dead don't stay put. Sometimes, the guards end up guarding something far older, and far darker, than anyone ever told them. But the story didn't end with his transfer. Months after leaving, Derek received a late-night phone call from an unknown number. When he answered, all he heard was that same static from his radio, and then the whisper again, "Derek." He hung up immediately, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night he dreamt of the morgue table, the sheet slowly rising as if someone, or something, was underneath. He started suffering from sleep paralysis, waking in his bed unable to move while shadows drifted across his ceiling. In those terrifying tales, he swore he saw the faceless figure leaning over him, inches from his face. Friends told him it was stress, but Derek knew better. Once you've worked nights in a place full of restless souls, you recognize the difference between a dream and an eerie encounter. One evening, he ran into an old coworker who still worked at the hospital. The man admitted that other guards had quit too. They all heard voices, saw figures on the cameras, and some even reported creepy stories of cold hands grabbing them in the stairwell. It wasn't just him, it was the building itself. The hospital carried dark secrets, buried under years of suffering and death. Derek started researching and found reports of paranormal activity tied to the old basement. Decades ago, a patient had gone missing, only to be found lifeless in the morgue with no record of how she got there. Urban legends claim the hospital was built over older foundations, maybe even graves. It explained the haunted stories, the ghost stories whispered among staff, and why every guard who worked nights eventually broke down. Now, years later, Derek avoids hospitals altogether. He tapes over every webcam, refuses to sleep without lights, and still feels his chest tighten when he hears static. Because in true horror stories, sleep stories, and nightmare tales, the scariest monsters aren't the ones you see, they're the ones that call your name in the dark, long after you've left them behind. This story is about the mall after hours. Carlos worked security at a massive shopping mall. He liked the job, quiet nights, empty food courts, the sound of his boots echoing off the tiles. He thought of it as easy money. Until one winter night, he discovered the mall wasn't so empty after all. He was patrolling near the closed cinema when he noticed movement on the cameras, someone walking through the dark hallways. Thinking it was a trespasser, he went to investigate. But when he reached the spot, no one was there. He radioed his partner, who swore he also saw the figure on the monitors, tall, thin, moving slowly. Hours later, Carlos was making rounds when he heard children laughing. The sound came from the indoor playground. But the lights were off, the place deserted. He swept his flashlight through the jungle gym, and saw a small figure crouched inside, just for a moment, before it darted out of view. He called for backup, but his partner refused to come. "You won't find them," the man muttered. "You'll just make it worse." That night, the cameras glitched. Every screen showed different angles of Carlos himself, walking through the halls, even though he wasn't there. He rushed back to the office, but the footage looped endlessly, as if the building itself was recording him. On his last shift, Carlos was checking the service corridors when the overhead lights all went out. Only the red emergency lights glowed, bathing the halls in a bloody haze. Then, footsteps. Heavy ones, behind him. He turned, no one. But when he aimed his flashlight down the hall, a shadow figure stood at the end. Taller than a man, with limbs too long, slowly crawling toward him. He ran and never came back. Weeks later, the mall hired new guards. They quit within days. Rumors spread of paranormal activity, creepy stories whispered among staff, mannequins that moved, voices over the intercom, and cameras that recorded when unplugged. Carlos swears what he saw was real. He still avoids malls, unable to shake the memory of that long, crawling figure in the red light. Because some places don't close at night. Some places come alive. Even years later, he still gets nightmares of those service corridors. In them, the laughter of children mixes with the sound of footsteps, and the mall lights glow red again. He wakes up drenched in sweat, certain that if he ever set foot in another shopping center after dark, he'd see the shadow waiting for him. These weren't just urban legends, they were true scary horror stories that left him scarred forever. Carlos says the worst part wasn't what he saw, but what he felt. He swore the mall itself was alive, feeding on fear, luring guards deeper with eerie experiences until they broke. It was more than just a job gone wrong, it was a terrifying tale of urban fright, a haunted story that proved sometimes the places built for laughter and life can hold the darkest secrets after closing time. This story is about the office tower. Jamal was a security guard for a high-rise office building downtown. The place had 40 floors, most of them empty after 7 p.m. His shift was long and lonely, filled with checking stairwells and riding elevators to silent hallways. One night, while reviewing the cameras, Jamal noticed motion detected on the 22nd floor. Strange, no businesses were active there. He took the elevator up, and when the doors opened, the hallway lights flickered on by themselves. He stepped out, calling out, but the air was thick and heavy, like he'd walked into a sealed tomb. Halfway down the hall, he heard a door slam behind him. He spun, but every office door was closed. Then, from inside one of the rooms, came the sound of typing. Slow. Rhythmic. He opened the door, empty room, no furniture, no power outlet. Just a single chair in the middle of the floor. Back at the office, the cameras told a different story. On the screen, he saw himself enter the room, and saw someone else sitting in the chair. A pale woman, hair hanging over her face, watching him. Yet in reality, he'd seen nothing. Night after night, the 22nd floor came alive. Lights flickering. Phones ringing with no power. Elevators stopping there on their own. Jamal grew paranoid, refusing to check that level without backup. One night, he got stuck in the elevator. The lights went out. The emergency phone rang. He picked it up, and a woman's voice whispered, "You're late." When the doors finally opened, he was on the 22nd floor. The chair was there again. This time, facing the elevator. That was his last night. Jamal quit, but the nightmares stayed. Sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he dreams of the chair, and the pale woman waiting. Because in true horror stories, paranormal haunted tales, and eerie encounters, sometimes the things you guard don't need doors or keys to get in. Sometimes, they're already there, waiting for you. But the nightmares grew worse. Jamal began experiencing sleep paralysis, waking in his bed unable to move, while hearing the faint clack of typewriter keys echoing in his room. In the corner, he'd see the shadow of the chair, and the pale figure slumped in it, hair still covering her face. These weren't just dreams, they were chilling scares, terrifying tales that bled into his waking life. Weeks later, one of his old coworkers reached out. The man admitted he'd also seen things on the 22nd floor, doors opening by themselves, ghostly reflections in glass, and security footage showing people who weren't there. He called them urban legends at first, but his voice shook as he confessed, "She's still there." It wasn't just Jamal. The building itself was haunted, carrying dark secrets no one wanted to acknowledge. Even now, Jamal avoids downtown at night. When he drives past tall buildings, he refuses to look at the higher floors, afraid he'll spot the chair silhouetted against a window. In his heart, he knows what he experienced wasn't just paranoia, it was one of those true scary horror stories that leave scars forever. Because some haunted tales don't end when you leave the job. They follow you, a nightmare tale you can never escape. Being a security guard means protecting others. But as these true scary horror stories show, from Derek in the hospital basement, to Carlos in the haunted mall, to Jamal in the office tower, sometimes the real danger isn't outside trying to break in. Sometimes, it's already inside, watching the watchers. So the next time you pass a security guard in a lonely building, remember, the hallways they walk, the rooms they enter, and the cameras they monitor may hold more than just shadows. They may be guarding not just property, but dark secrets, paranormal presences, and terrifying tales that will never make it into an incident report. If you enjoyed these creepy stories, haunted tales, sleep stories, and nightmare tales, smash that like button, subscribe, and share your own eerie encounters in the comments. Because the scariest stories aren't just urban legends, they're true stories, happening in places you pass every day. Because in the end, the most terrifying part of these security guard horror stories isn't what they saw, it's knowing they were the only ones awake to see it.